They called her crazy. A former surgeon who lost her job, sold her mansion, and spent every dollar she had building a massive shelter on top of a mountain. Scientists dismissed her warnings. The mayor ordered her shelter to be demolished. Nobody believed the disaster she claimed was coming. Then something terrifying happened. Thousands of animals began fleeing toward the mountain. Birds abandoned the coastline. Emergency helicopters filled the sky. And on the horizon, a monstrous wall of water, taller than a 10-story building, was racing toward the shore. What no one knew was that Ava had seen this exact moment 1 month earlier, after she died on an operating table and somehow came back to life. Ava Carter stood beneath the bright surgical lights of St. Matthew Medical Center, her gloved hands steady, despite having already worked nearly 12 hours without a proper break. The operating room smelled faintly of disinfectant and sterile plastic, familiar scents that had become part of her life long ago. At 30 years old, Ava was one of the hospital's most respected trauma surgeons. She stood just under 5 feet 7 inches tall, with an athletic build maintained through years of exhausting shifts and disciplined routines. Her chestnut brown hair was tied tightly into a practical ponytail beneath her surgical cap, and her fair skin carried faint signs of fatigue around her eyes from countless sleepless nights. Yet there remained something striking about her sharp blue eyes, a quiet determination that rarely wavered under pressure. Most people who met Ava described her as calm. Some called her stubborn. Others believed she possessed the unusual ability to remain composed while everyone else panicked. That trait had not come naturally. 7 years earlier, during her residency, Ava had lost a teenage patient following a devastating highway accident. The memory still haunted her. She remembered standing helplessly beside the operating table as the boy's heart monitor fell silent. Since that day, she had dedicated herself completely to medicine, convincing herself that perfection was the only acceptable standard. Every success felt temporary. Every mistake remained permanently etched into her memory. The patient lying before her was a 58-year-old fisherman suffering from severe internal bleeding after a boating accident. The surgery was difficult, but progressing well. "Blood pressure stabilizing," announced Dr. Sarah Miller. Sarah stood across the operating table assisting Ava. At 42 years old, Sarah was an experienced anesthesiologist known throughout the hospital for her reliability and patience. She was slightly shorter than Ava, with shoulder-length blonde hair tucked beneath her cap and warm brown eyes that often helped nervous patients relax before surgery. Years spent caring for critically ill patients had given Sarah a calm demeanor that rarely cracked even during emergencies. "Good," Ava replied. "Let's continue." Standing nearby was Daniel Brooks, a 28-year-old surgical nurse. Daniel possessed broad shoulders and a strong build developed from years of amateur boxing. His dark hair and square jaw gave him a rugged appearance, but his easy smile often made patients trust him immediately. Raised by a single mother who worked multiple jobs to support him, Daniel had developed deep respect for hard work and teamwork. The procedure continued smoothly. Outside the operating room, life inside the hospital moved as it always did. Doctors rushed between departments. Nurses delivered medications. Families waited anxiously in hallways hoping for good news. Inside the operating room, however, something changed. The overhead lights flickered. Once, twice. Then darkness briefly swallowed the room. Several monitors emitted warning beeps before emergency backup power restored illumination. Daniel glanced upward. "That's strange." Sarah frowned. "We haven't had electrical issues in months." Ava continued working. "Stay focused." The lights stabilized for several minutes. Then they flickered again. Longer this time. The heart monitor screen flashed, and several surgical instruments momentarily lost power. An uneasy feeling settled over Ava's chest. She could not explain it. Perhaps it was instinct. Perhaps simple concern. But something felt wrong. "Contact maintenance," she said quietly. Daniel nodded and moved toward the communication panel. Before he reached it, every light in the room flashed simultaneously. A violent burst of sparks erupted from a ceiling fixture. The room exploded with blinding white light. Ava felt an intense surge of electricity strike her body. Pain unlike anything she had ever experienced shot through every nerve. Her muscles locked instantly. The scalpel fell from her hand. Someone screamed. Perhaps Sarah. Perhaps Daniel. Perhaps herself. She could not tell. The world became a chaotic storm of flashing light and deafening noise. Then everything disappeared. Silence. Darkness. Nothing. And hours later, emergency crews rushed through the hospital corridors. Several operating rooms had suffered catastrophic electrical failures. Paramedics and rescue personnel found doctors and nurses unconscious across the surgical wing. Many showed signs of severe electrical trauma. Among the victims were Sarah Miller and Daniel Brooks. Both remained unresponsive. As rescue teams searched the operating room, one medic suddenly shouted, "She's breathing!" The survivor was Ava, barely alive. Her pulse was weak, her breathing shallow. Yet somehow, against all expectations, she remained alive. She was immediately transferred to the intensive care unit. News of the accident spread quickly throughout Seabrook. Families gathered outside the hospital. Reporters arrived. Questions multiplied. And how could such a failure occur in a modern medical facility? Why had only one person survived? 2 days later, Sheriff Robert Walker led the official investigation. Walker was a tall man in his late 50s with weathered skin, gray hair, and a thick mustache that reflected decades spent serving the community. Known for his honesty and practical judgment, he rarely jumped to conclusions. Maintenance crews eventually discovered the source. Deep inside one of the hospital's primary electrical conduits lay the charred remains of a rat. The animal had chewed through insulation surrounding several high-voltage cables. The resulting short circuit triggered a cascading electrical failure that spread through critical systems before protective mechanisms could respond. The explanation satisfied engineers. It satisfied hospital administrators. It satisfied insurance investigators. Yet for reasons he could not explain, Sheriff Walker felt uneasy while staring at the burned remains. Something about the tragedy felt unfinished. Far above them, in a quiet intensive care room, Ava Carter remained unconscious. Machines monitored every heartbeat. Doctors waited. Outside her window, rain continued falling over the California coast. And somewhere beyond the darkness of her silence, when Ava Carter finally opened her eyes, the first thing she noticed was the sound. Beep, beep, beep. A heart monitor pulsed steadily somewhere beside her bed. For several moments she could not remember where she was. Bright white ceiling panels floated above her vision. Her body felt impossibly heavy, as if every muscle had been replaced with wet concrete. The simple act of breathing required effort. Then fragments returned. The operating room, the flashing lights, Sarah's voice, the blinding explosion, pain. Ava tried to move her right hand. Her fingers twitched weakly. Immediately, a nurse sitting nearby stood up. "Dr. Carter?" The woman hurried toward the bed. Her name tag read, Jennifer Collins. Jennifer appeared to be in her early 30s, with short auburn hair cut neatly around her jawline and pale freckles scattered across her cheeks. Unlike many hospital nurses hardened by years of emergency work, Jennifer possessed an unusually gentle personality. Her younger brother had died from leukemia when she was 16, an experience that inspired her to enter medicine. Patients often remembered her kindness more than her technical skill. "You're awake," Jennifer said softly. Ava attempted to answer, but her throat felt raw. Jennifer quickly offered water. As Ava drank, memories continued returning piece by piece. "What happened?" she finally whispered. Jennifer hesitated. The brief pause told Ava everything she needed to know. Something had gone terribly wrong. "You've been unconscious for 9 days." 9 days. The number felt unreal. Ava stared silently at the ceiling. 9 days erased from existence. 9 days she would never remember. Jennifer explained what little she knew. The electrical accident had shocked the entire surgical team. Several staff members remained hospitalized. Some were recovering slowly. Others faced months of rehabilitation. The words blurred together. Ava listened, but her attention drifted elsewhere. Because something strange was happening, images flashed suddenly through her mind, not memories. Something else. She saw towering waves crashing against a coastline. She saw streets flooded beneath dark water. She saw people running, screaming, a helicopter spinning through violent winds. Then the vision vanished. Ava gasped sharply. Jennifer leaned forward. "Dr. Carter?" Ava blinked repeatedly. The hospital room returned. "What is it?" "Nothing," Ava answered. But she knew she was lying. The images felt real. Far too real. Over the next several days, her physical condition improved rapidly. Doctors considered her recovery remarkable given the severity of her injuries. Yet the visions continued, sometimes during conversations, sometimes while eating, sometimes during sleep. Each episode lasted only seconds. A collapsing bridge, a crowded evacuation route, ocean water rushing inland, and always the same overwhelming feeling. Fear. Pure, overwhelming fear. One afternoon, Sheriff Robert Walker visited her room. The older lawman removed his hat respectfully before entering. His lined face appeared more tired than Ava remembered from the investigation reports shown on television. "You gave us quite a scare, Doctor." Ava managed a small smile. Walker informed her that investigators had officially concluded the accident was caused by the damaged electrical conduit and the burned rat found inside the hospital system. The case was effectively closed. A simple explanation. Had a tragic accident. Nothing supernatural, nothing mysterious. Yet as Walker spoke, another image erupted inside Ava's mind. She suddenly saw him standing beside emergency vehicles beneath a blood-red sunset. People were shouting. Sirens echoed everywhere. Behind him, seawater covered an entire highway. The vision disappeared almost instantly. Ava gripped the bedsheet. Her pulse accelerated. Walker noticed. "You all right?" Ava forced herself to nod. After he left, she spent hours staring through the hospital window. Logic told her these experiences were neurological side effects. Perhaps brain trauma. Perhaps medication. Perhaps psychological stress. Every medical explanation seemed more reasonable than the alternative, yet the details troubled her. The images were becoming clearer, more consistent, connected, almost like pieces of a future event. One night, unable to sleep, Ava found herself watching a documentary playing quietly on the hospital television. The program discussed near-death experiences. Several survivors described vivid perceptions during periods of clinical death. Some claimed to have seen impossible things. Some described events that later occurred. Ava immediately dismissed most of the stories. She was a scientist, a surgeon. She trusted evidence, not superstition, not miracles, not prophecies. Yet, as midnight approached, she could not ignore one terrifying possibility. What if something had changed? What if those visions were not random hallucinations? What if they were warnings? Outside, rain drifted across the dark California coastline. Far beyond the hospital walls, waves rolled silently against distant shores, and somewhere deep inside her recovering mind, the approaching disaster continued growing clearer with every passing day. 3 weeks after leaving intensive care, Ava Carter walked through the main entrance of St. Matthew Medical Center, carrying a nervous smile she did not truly feel. The hospital looked exactly as it always had. Nurses crossed the lobby pushing equipment carts. Visitors sat quietly in waiting areas. Doctors hurried between departments carrying tablets and coffee cups. To everyone else, life had resumed its normal rhythm. For Ava, however, nothing felt normal anymore. Although her physical injuries had healed remarkably well, her mind remained unsettled. The visions had never stopped. Some arrived during sleep, others appeared without warning. A flooded highway, a collapsing marina, crowds running through streets covered in seawater. Each image lasted only seconds, yet every one felt disturbingly real. Ava had told nobody, not her doctors, not Sheriff Walker, not even Sarah Miller, who was slowly recovering and preparing to return to work herself. She feared the answer she might receive. Neurological damage, post-traumatic hallucinations, psychosis. Any of those diagnoses could permanently destroy her career, so she remained silent. That morning, she reviewed patient files inside the surgical department. Her hands appeared steady, her voice sounded normal. Yet beneath the surface, she felt trapped between two realities, one grounded in medicine and logic, the other filled with impossible glimpses of a future she could neither understand nor control. Near noon, she met her next patient. His name was Richard Bennett. Richard was 63 years old, a retired school principal scheduled for a complicated abdominal procedure. He was tall despite age-related stooping, with silver hair carefully combed backward and kind green eyes that immediately reminded Ava of a favorite teacher from childhood. Years spent guiding students had given him patience and warmth. Even while facing surgery, he spent more time reassuring his worried family than worrying about himself. Standing beside him was his daughter, Olivia Bennett. Olivia appeared to be around 35, with shoulder-length black hair and tired eyes from several sleepless nights spent caring for her father. She worked as a middle school teacher and inherited much of Richard's calm nature. "You'll take good care of him, right?" Olivia asked gently. Ava forced confidence into her smile. "Absolutely." For a moment, she believed it herself. Several hours later, the operation began. Everything proceeded according to plan. Monitors displayed stable readings. The surgical team worked efficiently. Ava concentrated on the procedure. Then it happened again. Without warning, a vision exploded inside her mind. She saw dark ocean waves crashing against a harbor. Emergency sirens echoed across a city. People screamed while vehicles became trapped in rising water. The image appeared sharper than ever before, more detailed, more vivid. For nearly 3 seconds, Ava completely lost focus. 3 seconds. That was all. When reality returned, she immediately realized something was wrong. A small artery had been damaged. Blood filled the surgical field. The operating room transformed instantly. Alarms sounded. Nurses moved faster. Orders flew across the room. Ava attempted to regain control. For several desperate minutes, the team fought to stabilize Richard Bennett, but complications multiplied rapidly. His blood pressure collapsed, and cardiac arrest followed. The resuscitation effort continued for nearly 20 minutes. Nothing worked. At 4:17 p.m., Richard Bennett was pronounced dead. Silence filled the operating room. Nobody spoke. Ava stared motionlessly at the monitor displaying a flat line. The patient was gone. Her mistake had lasted seconds. Its consequences would last forever. That evening, she sat alone inside an administrative conference room. Across the table sat Dr. Leonard Graves, the hospital director. Graves was a stern man in his early 60s with narrow features, steel gray hair, and sharp blue eyes that rarely revealed emotion. Decades earlier, he had lost a younger brother due to medical negligence, an experience that shaped his uncompromising attitude toward professional responsibility. The internal review had already begun, and several staff members reported noticing Ava's unusual hesitation during surgery. Questions emerged regarding her mental readiness after the accident. Ava offered no defense. What explanation could she possibly give? That she had been distracted by visions of the future? Even she barely believed it herself. 2 days later, the decision became official. Her surgical privileges were revoked. Her employment terminated. For the first time since medical school, Ava Carter was no longer a doctor. The drive home felt endless. Rain covered the windshield. Streetlights blurred into pale golden streaks. When she finally entered her large hillside home overlooking the Pacific Ocean, the silence felt unbearable. No patients, no colleagues, no purpose, only memories, and the visions. That night, Ava sat alone in darkness without turning on a single light. Hours passed. The future haunted her. The past crushed her, and somewhere beyond the distant ocean horizon, 32 days had passed since Ava Carter lost her medical license. The curtains in her hillside home remained closed most days. Dust slowly collected across polished furniture that had once reflected the successful life she had built for herself. Empty coffee cups sat forgotten beside stacks of medical journals she no longer had the motivation to read. The woman who once spent 12 hours saving lives now struggled to find a reason to leave her bed. Outside, spring had arrived along the northern California coast. Inside, time felt frozen. Ava spent most mornings sitting alone in the darkness of her living room overlooking the Pacific Ocean. From her elevated property, she could normally see fishing boats moving across the distant water. Lately, she rarely opened the curtains long enough to look. The guilt remained unbearable. Richard Bennett's face haunted her thoughts every day, as she replayed the surgery repeatedly, examining every second, every decision, every mistake, every possibility. The outcome never changed. At night, the visions continued. Sometimes they appeared as brief flashes, sometimes entire scenes unfolded before her eyes. She saw emergency shelters overflowing with frightened families. She saw traffic jams stretching for miles. She saw enormous waves swallowing entire neighborhoods. Most disturbing of all, she increasingly recognized locations from around Seabrook. The disaster was no longer happening somewhere unknown. It was coming here. One gray afternoon, Ava sat motionless on her couch while rain tapped softly against the windows. A television news broadcast played quietly in the background, more for company than information. She barely listened, until one sentence captured her attention. A minor offshore earthquake has been recorded approximately 80 miles west of the California coastline. Ava immediately looked up. The television screen displayed a map of the Pacific Ocean. A red marker flashed offshore. The reporter continued speaking. The earthquake measured only 4.8 in magnitude. No tsunami warning had been issued. Scientists believed the event posed no danger to coastal communities. Ava felt her heartbeat quicken. The map, the coordinates, the coastline. She had seen them before. Not on television. Inside her visions. Suddenly, another memory surfaced, a crowded evacuation route, police vehicles, helicopters, the ocean retreating unnaturally from shore. Her breathing became shallow. No. She stood quickly. The room seemed smaller. The television reporter continued discussing geological activity beneath the ocean floor. To everyone else, it sounded routine. To Ava, it sounded like the opening chapter of a nightmare she had already witnessed. That evening, she searched every available scientific report regarding offshore seismic activity. Old habits from her medical career returned as she examined research papers, geological surveys, and government monitoring data. Hour after hour, she sat before her computer. The earthquake appeared insignificant. Experts unanimously agreed no unusual threat existed, no major fault rupture had occurred, no tsunami indicators had been detected. Everything pointed toward a harmless natural event. Yet Ava could not shake the feeling growing inside her, because another detail troubled her. The visions had become more frequent since the earthquake occurred, almost as if some invisible countdown had begun. Near midnight, her phone rang unexpectedly. The caller was Sarah Miller. Months of rehabilitation had helped Sarah recover from the electrical accident. Though not yet fully returned to work, she sounded stronger than she had during previous conversations. "How are you holding up?" Sarah asked. Ava hesitated. She could tell Sarah the truth, the visions, the earthquake, the growing certainty. Instead, she gave the safer answer. "I'm managing." Sarah remained silent for a moment. "You don't sound like you're managing." The observation struck deeper than Ava expected. Few people still called her. Most former colleagues had quietly moved on. Sarah had not. After surviving the accident herself, she seemed to understand trauma better than most. For nearly an hour, they talked. Not about medicine, not about lawsuits, not about Richard Bennett, simply about life. For the first time in weeks, Ava felt slightly less alone. And after the call ended, she walked onto her balcony. Cold ocean air brushed against her face. Far below, waves rolled peacefully toward shore. Nothing about the scene suggested danger. Nothing appeared unusual. Yet deep within her mind, she remembered towering walls of water destroying everything in their path. The contrast terrified her. Ava remained outside long after midnight studying the distant horizon. The earthquake itself had been small, almost meaningless, but she no longer believed it was random. For reasons she could not explain, she felt certain she had just witnessed the first warning sign. And somewhere beneath the dark waters of the Pacific Ocean, forces beyond human understanding had already begun to move. The morning fog rolled inland from the Pacific, covering the coastal highway in a pale gray veil, as Ava Carter drove south toward the Pacific Coastal Disaster Research Center. The building sat on a rocky bluff overlooking the ocean, its glass exterior reflecting the restless waves below. For nearly an hour, she had debated turning the car around. Every rational part of her mind warned her that she would sound ridiculous. Yet another part, the same instinct that had saved countless patients during her medical career, refused to remain silent. The center itself resembled a university campus more than a government facility. Researchers moved between buildings carrying laptops and stacks of reports. Satellite dishes rotated slowly above the main structure. Inside, giant digital maps displayed weather systems, seismic activity, and ocean currents stretching across the Pacific Basin. So Ava waited nearly 40 minutes before finally being escorted into a conference room. Seated at the far end of the table was Professor Michael Harrison. Michael was 61 years old, tall and lean, with sharp cheekbones and silver hair combed neatly backward. Thin, wire-rimmed glasses rested on a face shaped by decades of intellectual discipline. His calm blue eyes rarely displayed strong emotion, and his reputation throughout the scientific community bordered on legendary. 20 years earlier, he had accurately predicted a major earthquake sequence along the western coast, earning international recognition. The success transformed him into one of America's leading experts on geological hazards. Unfortunately, years of constant praise had also made him skeptical of extraordinary claims unsupported by evidence. Beside him sat Dr. Emily Richardson. Emily appeared younger than Ava expected, perhaps 42 years old. She possessed dark auburn hair tied loosely behind her head and intelligent green eyes that rarely stopped analyzing her surroundings. Unlike Harrison's reserved demeanor, Emily projected quiet warmth. Early in her career, she had lost her husband during a violent hurricane in Louisiana, an experience that pushed her toward disaster research. Since then, she had dedicated herself to understanding natural catastrophes and improving warning systems. Several additional researchers occupied seats around the room, listening politely. Michael folded his hands together. "Miss Carter, Dr. Richardson tells me you requested this meeting because of concerns regarding the offshore earthquake." Ava nodded. Her throat suddenly felt dry. For several seconds she struggled to organize thoughts that sounded reasonable inside her head, but increasingly absurd once spoken aloud. She finally began. She explained the electrical accident, the coma, the recurring visions, the images of flooding, evacuation, helicopters, and destruction. The room remained silent. Nobody interrupted. When she finished, several researchers exchanged cautious glances. Michael leaned back slightly. "Dr. Carter," he said carefully, "I don't doubt that you've experienced something profoundly traumatic." The word traumatic immediately bothered Ava. She already knew where this conversation was heading. Michael continued. "However, nothing in our current data supports the possibility of a major tsunami event." A large monitor illuminated behind him. Graphs appeared, fault maps, seismic records, ocean pressure measurements, and everything pointed toward normal geological activity. Emily spoke next. Unlike Michael, her voice carried genuine sympathy. "The earthquake was relatively minor. We've monitored every available sensor. There is no evidence suggesting an imminent large-scale disaster." Ava listened. Part of her desperately wanted them to be correct. Perhaps the visions truly were neurological side effects. Perhaps grief and trauma had distorted her perception. Perhaps she needed treatment rather than action. Yet another image suddenly flashed across her mind. People running through flooded streets, children crying, emergency vehicles overturned beneath rushing water. The vision vanished. Ava gripped the edge of the table. They felt real, she whispered. No one answered immediately. Eventually, Michael closed the final report. As scientists, we must rely on observable evidence. All extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. The statement was not cruel. It was logical, reasonable, professional, and devastating. The meeting ended shortly afterward. Emily accompanied Ava toward the exit. For a moment, she hesitated before speaking. I don't think you're lying. Ava looked at her. Emily offered a small, sympathetic smile. But believing you and proving you're right are very different things. Outside, ocean winds swept across the parking lot. Ava stood beside her car, watching waves crash against distant rocks. Hours earlier, she had arrived believing someone might finally validate her fears. Instead, she carried home the same uncertainty she had brought with her. Maybe Michael Harrison was right. Maybe trauma had damaged something inside her mind. Maybe every vision meant nothing. And as she drove north along the coastline, sunlight briefly broke through the clouds and illuminated the Pacific Ocean. The water appeared peaceful, beautiful, harmless. Yet Ava could not shake the feeling that somewhere beyond that calm horizon, an unseen threat continued growing larger with every passing day. For the first time since her awakening, she found herself questioning not the scientists, but her own sanity. A cold ocean wind rattled the windows of Ava Carter's hillside house as darkness settled across the California coast. The drive home from the Pacific Coastal Disaster Research Center had left her emotionally exhausted. For hours, she sat alone in her kitchen, staring at an untouched cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. Professor Harrison's words continued echoing inside her mind. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. The statement was logical. It was fair. It was also useless to someone who possessed no proof at all. By midnight, exhaustion finally overcame her. Ava climbed the stairs and entered her bedroom. Moonlight filtered through a narrow opening between the curtains, casting pale silver shapes across the floor. Normally, she slept poorly since the accident, often waking from disturbing visions. Tonight felt different. So, an unusual heaviness settled over her body the moment her head touched the pillow. Within minutes, she drifted into sleep. At first, the dream appeared ordinary. She stood alone inside an endless field covered by thick gray fog. The air felt strangely still. No wind moved, no sound existed. Then she heard tiny footsteps. A small figure emerged from the mist. A rat. Its fur appeared dark brown, almost black in places, with faint burn marks scattered along its body. One ear seemed partially damaged, as though it had survived a fire. Its eyes reflected an unnatural intelligence. Ava immediately recognized it. The rat found inside the hospital electrical system. The same creature responsible for the accident. The same creature indirectly linked to everything that had happened afterward. The animal stopped several feet away and stared directly at her. Ava expected fear, and instead she felt curiosity. The rat spoke. Its voice sounded calm and oddly human. You finally came. Ava remained frozen. The scene felt impossibly real. Am I dreaming? She asked. The rat tilted its head. Does it matter? The answer unsettled her more than the talking animal itself. Around them, the fog slowly began changing. Images emerged within the mist. Entire cities appeared and disappeared. Roads, buildings, harbors, crowds of people. Then came the ocean. Ava watched enormous waves rise from the horizon. Not ordinary waves, walls of water, mountains of moving sea stretching across the landscape. Entire neighborhoods vanished beneath them. Vehicles floated like toys. Buildings collapsed. People ran desperately toward higher ground. The destruction extended farther than any vision she had previously experienced. This is coming, the rat said quietly. When? The animal's eyes never left hers. 1 month. The word struck her like a physical blow. 30 days. Not years, not decades. 30 days. The images intensified. She saw emergency broadcasts interrupted by panic. She saw helicopters rescuing survivors from rooftops. She saw families separated by floodwaters. Most disturbing of all, she recognized Seabrook. Her city, her coastline, her home. Ava felt terror rising inside her chest. "Why are you showing me this?" The rat remained silent for several seconds. Then it answered, "Because nobody else can." The fog shifted again. This time she saw herself standing atop a mountain. Thousands of people surrounded her. Children, families, elderly residents, animals gathered beside them. Below, the world drowned beneath an endless sea. The image disappeared. Everything vanished. The fog, the city, the rat. Darkness swallowed the dream. Ava awoke violently. Her entire body jerked upright. Her heart pounded. Sweat soaked her shirt despite the cold room. For several moments, she struggled to breathe normally. The digital clock beside her bed displayed 3:17 a.m. Outside, ocean waves crashed faintly against distant cliffs. Everything appeared normal, yet the dream felt more vivid than reality itself. She moved to the bathroom sink and splashed water across her face. The reflection staring back at her looked different, not physically, emotionally. For months, she had existed between uncertainty and fear. She had questioned her sanity, questioned the visions, questioned herself. Now something had changed. The dream provided no scientific evidence, no measurable data, no proof. Yet, deep within her instincts, she felt absolute certainty. The tsunami was real, the timeline was real, and time was running out. Shati. As dawn slowly brightened the eastern sky, Ava walked onto her balcony overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The water below appeared calm and peaceful. Beautiful enough to convince anyone there was nothing to fear. A month earlier, she might have believed that illusion. Not anymore. For the first time since the accident, her uncertainty disappeared. If nobody else would prepare, she would. If nobody else would listen, she would still act. The cost no longer mattered. Her reputation no longer mattered. Her career was already gone. Her old life already belonged to the past. Standing above the sleeping coastline, Ava Carter made a decision that would change the lives of thousands. She would risk everything she owned to save people who did not yet know they were in danger. The sunrise painted the Pacific Ocean in shades of gold and crimson as Ava Carter stood on the balcony of her hillside mansion for what she knew would be the last time. The sea looked peaceful, almost innocent. A month earlier, she would have admired the view. Now she saw only the silent force that, according to every vision she had witnessed, would soon become a destroyer. The decision had already been made. There would be no turning back. Inside the house, moving crews carried furniture toward waiting trucks. Family photographs disappeared from the walls. The rooms that had once reflected years of hard work and professional success slowly became empty. Ava felt surprisingly little sadness. The mansion had belonged to the person she used to be, a respected surgeon, a woman with a stable future. That life no longer existed. By noon, she signed the final documents transferring ownership to a wealthy technology entrepreneur from San Francisco. Within hours, several $1 million had been deposited into her account. The following morning, Ava drove to the local branch of Pacific National Bank. The bank manager personally greeted her. His name was Thomas Green. Thomas was a heavy-set man in his early 50s with neatly combed gray hair, a square face, and warm brown eyes. 20 years working in finance had taught him patience and professionalism, but growing up during a period when his family lost everything in a recession had also made him cautious about reckless financial decisions. As he reviewed Ava's request, concern appeared across his face. "You want to withdraw the entire inheritance account?" Ava nodded. The inheritance came from her father, James Carter. When before his death several years earlier, James had built a successful construction materials company. He was remembered as a hard-working entrepreneur with broad shoulders, weathered hands, and a stubborn determination that never accepted defeat. He had taught Ava that difficult decisions often required courage long before certainty existed. Now his savings represented the foundation of her plan. Everything he had built, everything she still owned. Thomas hesitated. "This is a substantial amount of money." "I know. You understand there are risks?" Ava thought about the giant wave she had seen in her visions, the flooded streets, the destruction. "The risks are exactly why I'm doing this." Within days, she possessed enough capital to begin. Her destination was Eagle Peak Mountain. The mountain stood above the surrounding region, rising higher than any nearby ridge. Covered in forests and rocky slopes, it overlooked dozens of communities scattered across the coastline and inland valleys. Most investors considered the land worthless. Ava considered it salvation. The purchase process moved quickly. Soon surveyors arrived, then engineers, then construction crews. Before long, the quiet mountain transformed into the largest building site in the county. The project manager overseeing construction was Daniel Brooks. After recovering from the electrical accident that had nearly killed him, Daniel had left hospital work permanently. The experience changed his priorities. Life felt too fragile now to spend every day inside operating rooms. When Ava contacted him with an offer to supervise construction, he accepted immediately. He still carried the same broad-shouldered frame and determined personality she remembered from the hospital. Yet there was something different in his eyes now, a deeper appreciation for survival. "What exactly are we building?" Daniel asked one morning while reviewing blueprints. "A shelter." "For how many people?" Ava paused. "As many as possible." Daniel stared at her for several seconds. Most people would have laughed. He didn't. Perhaps surviving the accident had taught him that impossible things sometimes happened. Work accelerated rapidly. Hundreds of laborers arrived from surrounding counties. Massive warehouses appeared. Water storage systems were installed. Backup generators filled reinforced utility buildings. A one-story structure spanning thousands of square meters slowly emerged near the summit. At the same time, Ava purchased enormous quantities of supplies: canned food, medical equipment, bottled water, blankets, portable beds, fuel reserves, animal feed, livestock fencing. Every available space became storage. The costs were staggering. Millions disappeared within weeks. Local residents soon noticed the activity. Rumors spread quickly throughout Seabrook. Some believed Ava was building a luxury retreat. Others claimed she had joined a survivalist cult. Many simply assumed she had lost her mind after the accident. Ava ignored them all. Every evening, she climbed a ridge overlooking the construction site. The shelter grew larger each day. Workers moved below like ants. Trucks arrived continuously. Time remained short. Money remained limited. Yet for the first time since awakening from her coma, Ava felt she was moving towards something instead of running from it. The mountain was no longer just land. It was becoming hope. And if her visions proved true, it might soon become humanity's last refuge along the California coast. 2 weeks after construction began on Eagle Peak Mountain, the project had become the most controversial topic in Seabrook. Every coffee shop conversation eventually drifted toward Ava Carter. Every local radio station discussed her mountain shelter. Every social media page seemed to carry photographs of trucks climbing the mountain roads and workers pouring concrete near the summit. Most people no longer referred to her as Dr. Carter. Now she was simply the Mountain Woman. The nickname spread quickly, and it was rarely spoken kindly. Ava noticed the stares whenever she drove through town. Conversations stopped when she entered stores. Some people looked at her with pity, others with amusement. A few regarded her with genuine concern, believing the electrical accident had permanently damaged her mind. One afternoon, she stopped at a small grocery store to purchase supplies for the construction crews. As she pushed her cart toward the checkout line, she overheard several customers discussing her. "That's her. The Tsunami lady? Spent millions building a bunker. My cousin says she talks about visions." The group laughed. Ava lowered her eyes and continued walking. Months earlier, such humiliation would have devastated her. Now she felt mostly tired. Not angry, not offended, simply exhausted. Back on the mountain, however, work continued relentlessly. New water tanks had arrived, solar systems were being installed, additional livestock pens stretched across the lower slopes. The shelter itself now dominated the summit, its reinforced structure visible from miles away. Daniel Brooks remained one of the few people who never questioned her motives, and late one evening they stood overlooking the valley below as construction lights illuminated the mountain. "You know, most people think we're crazy," Daniel said with a faint smile. Ava looked toward the distant coastline. "They're probably right." Daniel laughed. The sound briefly eased some of the pressure she carried. For a moment, neither spoke. Then a convoy of black government vehicles appeared on the access road below. Ava immediately knew why they had come. The lead vehicle stopped near the construction office. Several officials emerged. Among them was William Anderson, the mayor of Seabrook. William was 58 years old, tall and broad-shouldered despite his age. Thick silver hair framed a weathered face marked by decades of public service. His strong jawline and calm posture projected authority even before he spoke. Residents respected him because he genuinely cared about the community. 20 years earlier, he had coordinated recovery efforts after a devastating wildfire destroyed several nearby neighborhoods. Since then, he had built a reputation as a practical leader who trusted facts over speculation. Unfortunately for Ava, facts were precisely what she lacked. The mayor approached, accompanied by legal advisors and county inspectors. His expression remained professional, not hostile, not friendly, simply serious. "Ms. Carter." "Mayor Anderson." They shook hands. William surveyed the massive shelter complex surrounding them. "The scale of this project is larger than we anticipated." Ava remained silent. He already knew that. "The county planning board has reviewed multiple complaints from residents." There it was, the real reason for his visit: concerns regarding permits, environmental impact, land use violations, infrastructure regulations. The official explanations arrived one after another. Eventually, William presented the final decision. "You have 15 days. Ava felt her stomach tighten. 15 days for what? To cease operations and begin dismantling unauthorized sections of this development. The words struck harder than she expected. Months of work, millions of dollars, hundreds of workers, all threatened by a single administrative order. Ava spent nearly an hour explaining everything: the accident, the visions, the tsunami, the dream, the approaching deadline she believed was rapidly drawing closer. William listened patiently. Unlike the scientists, he never interrupted. When she finished, he remained quiet for several moments. Finally, he sighed. "Ms. Carter, I don't believe you're intentionally deceiving anyone." Ava felt a brief flicker of hope. And then he continued, "But I think you're a woman who experienced a severe trauma and is trying to make sense of it." The hope vanished. The mayor genuinely believed he was helping her. That made the conversation even worse. Before leaving, William handed her the official notice. 15 days. The convoy eventually disappeared down the mountain road. Night settled over Eagle Peak. Construction crews slowly returned to work. Generators hummed. Machines continued operating. Life moved forward. Yet Ava stood alone, watching the mayor's taillights disappear into darkness. For the first time since committing herself to the project, doubt returned. What if she was wrong? What if the scientists were right? What if she destroyed her entire life chasing a nightmare that existed only inside her own mind? The questions followed her long after midnight. But when she closed her eyes, she once again saw a towering wall of water swallowing the coastline. And despite every voice telling her otherwise, she could not ignore what she had seen. 14 days passed faster than Ava Carter thought possible. The deadline imposed by Mayor William Anderson now stood only hours away. At sunrise the following morning, county crews, inspectors, and demolition contractors would begin dismantling large sections of the shelter complex atop Eagle Peak Mountain. Despite repeated appeals, legal petitions, and desperate attempts to buy more time, Ava had failed to change anyone's mind. The mountain remained busy late into the evening. Workers continued reinforcing storage buildings. Volunteers sorted emergency supplies. Generators hummed beneath the darkening sky. Yet an atmosphere of defeat hung over the entire project. Many employees quietly discussed finding other jobs after the demolition order took effect. Some already believed the shelter's days were numbered. Ava sat alone inside the enormous main structure near the summit, and the building stretched across thousands of square meters. But tonight it felt strangely empty. Rows of emergency beds waited unused. Stacks of food supplies filled storage rooms. Water tanks stood ready. Everything she had sacrificed her fortune to build seemed on the verge of destruction. Rain tapped softly against the roof. Outside, fog drifted across the mountain slopes. For the first time in weeks, Ava felt truly exhausted. Not physically, emotionally. She had lost her career, sold her home, spent nearly every dollar she owned, and tomorrow it might all disappear. Eventually, fatigue pulled her into sleep. Hours later, a sudden sharp pain jolted her awake. Ava sat upright. Something had bitten her ankle. Confused, she switched on a nearby lamp. A small rat stood near the edge of her bed. Its dark fur appeared damp from rain. One ear looked partially damaged, at the same ear she remembered from her dreams. For several seconds, Ava stared silently. The rat stared back. Her heart pounded. Part of her wondered whether she was still dreaming. The animal suddenly turned and ran toward the doorway. "Wait!" Ava jumped from the bed and followed. The rat disappeared outside. Cold night air struck her face. Then she saw it. Far beyond the neighboring hills, an orange glow illuminated the horizon. Fire. A massive fire. Flames climbed into the sky above a distant forested ridge. Dark smoke billowed upward like a storm cloud. Emergency sirens echoed faintly from below. Ava watched in disbelief. The sight alone would have been unsettling. But then she noticed something far stranger. Animals. Hundreds at first, then thousands. Deer emerged from the forests. Coyotes crossed open fields. Wild rabbits rushed through the grass. Birds filled the sky. Even livestock from surrounding farms appeared restless. The movement shared a single direction, upward, toward Eagle Peak Mountain. Ava stood frozen. She remembered the vision from her dream. The mountain crowded with living creatures. The same scene now unfolded before her eyes. Within hours, the lower ranch areas surrounding the shelter became filled with animals seeking refuge. Some gathered near the livestock pens. Others rested quietly beneath trees. Natural enemies ignored one another. Predators and prey remained unusually calm. The behavior defied explanation. Just before dawn, headlights appeared on the access road. Several vehicles climbed toward the summit. Mayor William Anderson stepped out, accompanied by county officials. He looked exhausted. News of the wildfire had brought emergency teams across the region. And when Ava called earlier and described the strange animal migration, curiosity finally overcame skepticism. Now he stood staring across the mountain slopes. The mayor said nothing. Neither did his staff. Thousands of animals occupied the landscape before them. The silence lasted nearly a minute. Finally, William spoke. "I've never seen anything like this." Neither had Ava. The mayor slowly walked toward one of the observation points overlooking the valley. His expression had changed. The confidence he carried during previous meetings seemed diminished. Then his phone rang, a sharp, urgent sound that instantly drew everyone's attention. William answered. The color drained from his face almost immediately. "Repeat that." The voice on the other end continued speaking. Several seconds passed. No one moved. Finally, William lowered the phone. His hands trembled. "What happened?" Ava asked. The mayor looked toward the distant Pacific Ocean. His voice emerged barely above a whisper. "The National Tsunami Warning Center just issued an emergency alert." Nobody spoke. William swallowed hard. Then he delivered the words Ava had feared for months. "A massive tsunami has been detected crossing the Pacific." Shock spread across every face. County officials exchanged stunned glances. One dropped a clipboard. Another immediately reached for a phone. The mountain suddenly felt very small. Far below, the sleeping communities of Seabrook remained unaware. The ocean still appeared calm beneath the approaching dawn. But somewhere beyond the horizon, a wall of water was already racing toward California. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Ava Carter was no longer the only person who believed it. The first rays of dawn spread across the California coastline, but no one on Eagle Peak Mountain admired the sunrise. Every eye was fixed on the ocean. News helicopters thundered overhead. Emergency broadcasts echoed from radios and mobile phones. Sirens wailed continuously from Seabrook below. What had begun as disbelief only hours earlier had transformed into panic. Mayor William Anderson stood beside Ava Carter at the main observation platform near the summit. The confident public official who had once threatened to dismantle her shelter looked years older now. His shoulders seemed heavier. His face carried the exhaustion of a man confronting a disaster larger than anything he had ever imagined. Throughout the morning, streams of vehicles climbed the mountain roads. Families arrived carrying children. Farmers arrived with livestock trailers. Elderly residents arrived clutching medicine and family photographs. Some came because they trusted the emergency alerts. Others came because they remembered Ava's warnings. Many simply came because they had nowhere else to go. The shelter that once seemed absurd now became their only hope. Among the arriving survivors was Sarah Miller. The former anesthesiologist emerged from a crowded pickup truck carrying emergency medical supplies. Her blonde hair had grown slightly longer since the accident, and fatigue lined her face after a sleepless night spent helping evacuate patients from a regional clinic. Yet her calm determination remained unchanged. When she finally found Ava, neither woman spoke immediately. They simply embraced. No explanations were necessary. No apologies. No discussions about visions or predictions. The approaching ocean had already settled those arguments. And by midday, thousands of people crowded Eagle Peak Mountain. The shelter overflowed. Hallways filled with families. Storage buildings became temporary sleeping areas. Livestock occupied the lower ranches. Even the wildlife remained nearby. Deer rested beside fences. Birds filled surrounding trees. The mountain had become an island of life waiting above an ocean of uncertainty. Shortly after noon, one of the Coast Guard helicopters circling offshore transmitted new footage. The video appeared on multiple emergency screens throughout the shelter. Silence spread instantly. Far beyond the shoreline, an enormous wall of water stretched across the horizon. It looked impossible, unnatural, terrifying. The tsunami was larger than many forecasts predicted, much larger. People stared in disbelief. Some cried. Some prayed, others simply stood frozen. Ava watched quietly. And us. She had seen the wave countless times inside visions, yet witnessing reality proved far more horrifying. Minutes later, the ocean struck. The first impact sounded like distant thunder. Then came another, and another. The ground itself seemed to vibrate. Everyone standing along the observation areas witnessed the destruction unfold below. Water exploded across the coastline. Marinas vanished almost instantly. Entire neighborhoods disappeared beneath churning debris. Roads collapsed. Buildings shattered. Vehicles floated away like leaves in a storm. People who failed to evacuate in time were swept away by the unstoppable force. The tsunami continued advancing inland. Everything in its path disappeared. The destruction seemed endless. Hours passed before the violence finally began to weaken. By sunset, the lower valleys resembled an inland sea. Only elevated ridges remained visible above the water. The survivors spent that night together inside the shelter. Many mourned missing family members. Others stared silently into darkness. Ava moved constantly among them, providing reassurance where she could. Sarah organized medical treatment. Daniel coordinated supplies. Mayor Anderson personally distributed food and water. Nobody needed titles anymore. Everyone simply helped. The second day brought calm weather. The third brought retreating water. Slowly, the ocean released its grip upon the land. When rescue helicopters finally reached Eagle Peak Mountain, crews surveyed a landscape transformed beyond recognition. Seabrook no longer existed as it once had. Entire districts had been erased, harbors vanished, roads disappeared, thousands of homes were gone. Yet thousands of lives remained because they had reached the mountain in time. Several days later, federal evacuation teams began transporting survivors to temporary housing facilities farther inland. Before departing, Mayor Anderson gathered residents near the shelter entrance. The crowd fell silent. The mayor stepped forward. His voice trembled. "I was wrong." No politician in Seabrook's history had ever spoken those words so openly. William turned toward Ava. Tears filled his eyes. "Because of you, my family is alive. Because of you, this town still has people left to rebuild it." One by one, others approached. Farmers, teachers, children, families, people who had once mocked her, people who had called her insane. Now they thanked her. Some cried, some hugged her, some could barely find words. Ava accepted every gesture with quiet humility. When the final evacuation convoy departed days later, the mountain grew silent once again. Only the wind remained. Standing atop Eagle Peak, Ava looked across the devastated coastline, stretching toward the horizon. The world she once knew was gone. Her career was gone. Her former life was gone. But life itself remained. For the first time since awakening from the coma, she felt peace. Below lay ruin. Ahead lay uncertainty. Yet somewhere within that destruction existed the possibility of a new beginning. And so Ava Carter stayed on the mountain, ready to help build a future from the ruins left behind by the sea. Sometimes miracles do not arrive with bright lights or heavenly voices. Sometimes they come through ordinary people. A doctor who refuses to give up, a stranger who chooses to help, a leader who finds the courage to admit he was wrong, or a single person willing to stand alone when everyone else walks away. Whether Ava's visions were a gift from God, a miracle born from a second chance at life, or something beyond human understanding, one truth remained undeniable. Thousands of lives were saved because one person listened to the warning placed on her heart. In our daily lives, most of us will never face a giant tsunami, but we all face storms of our own: fear, loss, disappointment, uncertainty, and moments when we feel completely alone. During those times, faith reminds us that even when we cannot see the path ahead, God may already be preparing a way forward. And perhaps the greatest miracle is not predicting the future. Perhaps it is having the courage to do what is right before it is too late. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, share it with your friends and family, and leave a comment below telling us what you would have done if you were in Ava's situation. Your support helps us bring more inspiring stories to people around the world. And if you enjoy meaningful stories about hope, faith, courage, and second chances, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. May God bless you and your family with peace in difficult times, strength when challenges come, wisdom in your decisions, and hope for every tomorrow. Stay safe, stay kind, and remember, sometimes God's greatest miracles arrive through ordinary people who choose to believe, act, and never give up.